Okay, welcome to 3C at the Texas Conference on Digital Libraries. My name is Tao Tang. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a program coordinator at the University of Texas Libraries and a member of the TCDL Planning Committee. I'm pleased to be your session moderator today. For some housekeeping, Texas Digital Library and the TCDL Planning Committee are dedicated to providing an experience for everyone that is free from all forms of harassment and inclusive of all people. We ask that everyone here today be considerate and respectful in speech and action, attempt collaboration before conflict, refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior and speech, and be mindful of your environment and your fellow participants. You can also view our code of conduct on the homepage of the conference. This session will run approximately until 11:50. Please feel free to take breaks as you need. I invite you to say hello and chat in Whova and let us know where you're joining from, share resources, and make comments throughout today's lightning talks, or I'm sorry, presentations. You are also encouraged to post your questions in the Q&A section, where you can also vote on other questions that you'd like our speakers to answer. I will be watching for your questions in Q&A and share them with our speakers during and ask for Q&A after each presentation. And now on with the show. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Samantha Dodd from the Southern Methodist University. I will hand things over to you to get started.
Wonderful. All right, Tao, can you see and hear me?
Yes, everything looks great.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Samantha Dodd, and I am the curator of the Archives of Women of the Southwest at Southern Methodist University. I am also currently vice chair of the consortial group TARO, which is Texas Archival Resources Online. For those of you who caught part one of this presentation yesterday with Robert Weaver, our chair, thank you for coming back for more. And for those of you who are new and didn't catch yesterday, what and who is TARO? It is a consortial group of archives based out of the University of Texas at Austin Libraries. It's a free platform, so there's no membership fees to join. There's no fees to host materials with the site. And it facilitates access to historical materials from repositories all across Texas. So this includes university libraries, nonprofit groups, municipal archives, historical societies, so all kinds of organizations use and participate in TARO. It hosts a collection of descriptions or finding aids that we create to help our users locate information about their collections. And if you're unfamiliar with what a finding aid is, it's basically an aggregate description of materials. It can range from just a collection level description to a detailed inventory that can comprise a few boxes to a few thousand boxes to thousands of items. So there's a lot of variation on what these can look like. From a technical standpoint, TARO is housed at UT Libraries, but it's governed by volunteers and an elected steering committee made up of a chair, vice chair, immediate past chair, secretary, and 3 at-large members, along with a representative of UT Libraries. Our subcommittees comprise funding, government, outreach and education, standards, website and technology, who's currently involved in a lot of UX testing of our new website, an authorized term subcommittee, which is brand new and will help coordinate our subject headings for the brand new website. And immediately following my presentation, Devin Murphy is going to speak on this extensively. And then we also have a Summerlee subcommittee, which is funded by the Summerlee Foundation and aims to bring in new members to TARO who might not have the resources, technical skills, or knowledge to encode their own finding aids for the website. So we help do that for them. So if you've never used TARO before, this is our current website. It is like stepping back into a time machine, like a vintage 90s feel website. So it hasn't changed much in since the 20 years that we built it. So there's a lot of issues with this, and that it doesn't aesthetically look like anything modern researchers are used to interacting with. It lacks a lot of advanced search features. It doesn't have a mobile design, so this looks pretty miserable on a cell phone. So overall, the look, feel, and functionality of our current site is not helpful to our users or to the archivists who are engaged. Here's kind of what the advanced options look like at the moment. not only does the site on the front end have issues, but it's an issue for our members on the back end. Currently, you have to upload finding aids through an FTP site, which users are constantly getting locked out of or lose their password to, or there's a delay and when you upload it to how long before it's actually available on the website. So 2015, 2016, we did a NEH planning grant to overhaul the whole website. And luckily, and fortunately, thanks to a lot of hard work for the steering committee at that time, we received the implementation grant in 2018 to redesign the entire website. And it's going to make significant improvements to the overall appearance, new colors, new logo, new look, and also more robust searchability and enhanced user repository and finding aid management on the backside for our users. Basically, we're going to give them more capabilities and things that they can change from and put more of the abilities on the hands of the participants so that they can engage more with the site. And as part of the grant, we were able to hire a metadata librarian who is going to help standardize a list of browse and search terms for us, which is going to give us a new browse search feature we don't currently have on our site. So the big problem that we encountered is that during the NEH planning grant, the developers and the site design was basing the new site on what we had was called a best practice guide for our finding aids. And this, what elements are going to be required, what elements are preferred or optional. And again, we're 70 now repositories. These are just guidelines for how they create finding aids. Those finding aids look different across all of these different institutions. Some places have their own internal guides to writing finding aids. They want it to look a certain way for their repositories. This is 20 years of finding aids. So some of these early ones were created before the best practice guide, before some of the professional. From my personal experience, I've worked at 3 different institutions who are all part of Tarot, and at each institution, we had our own template for Tarot finding aids, and each one was different. It just had a different look, different elements were needed. And then on top of that, we have a variety of different ways that repositories are encoding finding aids. We have some that are doing it by hand in Word and Notepad and programs like Oxygen or XMetal. But then we have a number of repositories who have proprietary programs like Archive Space or Quadrastar, and they export their finding aids. So we have all of these different tens of thousands of finding aids that have different looks and feels, all of that information to the new site. And in order for the site to function properly, we need consistency. And in order for the site to have equity for access and equity of representation, we need to have consistency of this data. And in order for other more national projects like the proposed National Finding Aid Network, we need some consistency. There were some all hands meetings last fall in 2020 to kind of discuss how we would tackle this monumental problem of all this data, and realized that all of our current committees were pretty tapped out. WebTech was trying to come up with the usability testing. Standards was working on standardizing our best practice guide and updating that. Our education outreach was busy trying to create a guide to migration. So we decided, rather than to put this project on top of all of those existing volunteers, was to create an ad hoc group to just look at the data remediation issue. So here are the current data remediation subcommittee members and volunteers. They are a wonderful group of volunteers who've spent many, many hours with our repositories and working to help with this project. So we wouldn't have gotten this far without all of them. So huge thanks and shout out to all of these members. This committee is basically to determine what does it mean to make a finding aid valid for the new website, and what resources can we create and give to our participating repositories so that they can take care of this themselves, not overwhelm them, not frustrate them with the new site, and encourage them to keep participating in Tarot. So we had our first subcommittee meeting in December of 2020, and thanks to the UT libraries and the developers, we had a qual site or a checker site where we could upload finding aids and it would return error reports for us. So we just started submitting all kinds of different finding aids from all of our different institutions. And we created a tracking spreadsheet to see what errors were we getting, how do we fix the errors, what are the errors we don't understand, is there a problem with the development of the website that we need to alert them to. So we're basically tracking all of that. Also, we were able to give that information to our education team so that they would have examples for the guide to migration, so that when we gave this information to our repositories, we basically laid out, if you see this error, this is how you fix it, this is why you're seeing it. And so we wanted to make sure we had as many of the errors that we could find, and we were basically trying to break our finding aids and create the best guide we could give them. Another idea that we had was to outline a buddy system. Basically, we wanted to pair each repository with a single person that they could contact if they had questions about remediation, about the website, or if they got stuck on something, so that we weren't putting, again, more burden on the teams that were already working on the website, and so that we didn't have 10,000 emails coming in because everybody was replying all to listservs or to CCing everybody. They just had one single point of contact. So some of our other resources that we came up with, we've got, luckily, thanks to the Qual site, we get monthly error reports from UT libraries. And these are divided into two different reports that we get for every repository on Tarot. One kind of provides a cumulative overview. You have X number of that are now valid. Here are the number of errors based on each element that appears in a finding aid. And then there's a breakdown report, which literally goes guide by guide. In this file, these are the problems. In this file, these are the problems. Here are the warnings that you can take care of. We have some in-person training that thankfully we were able to transition to virtual. So we have a whole slate of virtual trainings coming up to basically get us all the way to the launch of the new website this fall. We have a resource library that we host on our Tarot Today blog. So all the documentation we create is in one central location for them. Our best practice guidelines that our standards subcommittee, more examples from our testing, and as updated the templates that are found in that guide so that they are now compliant with the new Tarot 2.0 website. We update the guide on remediation. Anytime we come across new issues, we're constantly updating that so that they have the most recent and relevant information. We've created all kinds of video guides and documentations that we host on our YouTube channel. And most recently, we were able to reallocate some grant funds to hire an archivist or remediator to go and do this work for institutions who either have nobody on staff right now, have no ability to do it themselves, or just need a helping hand to get through it. So thanks to this person we've already had, she's finished 3 or 4 different institutions. All of their finding aids have been remediated and uploaded, ready for the new site. And she's working through a number of more institutions and finding aids. So we have her until the end of June. And it's definitely been a big help to those institutions who are, they had a job search fail, or they haven't replaced somebody, or they're not back on normal hours yet. So having this as an extra backup option has been a great tool. So here are the virtual trainings that we have slated. We kicked off with a virtual meeting back in March where we introduced, here's the new website, and explained why we had to do this remediation, why it was important to work on this project. Next one coming up in June, where we're going to do some compliance and remediation work and just check in with everyone on how they're doing. We're hoping to have one on subject access and the subject terms browse list later this summer. And once the site has launched, we're going to have kind of tutorials on how to upload to the new site, possible trainings on archive space, because so many of our institutions use that program to export their finding aids. We're going to do one later at the end of August, beginning of September, right before we launch the new site, just to give an update where we are. And hopefully later this fall, we'll be back to in-person trainings for the public on how to use the site and for any new member institutions joining. So some additional problems that we ran into is that the whole time that we're trying to make progress on remediating the existing repositories are continuing to upload more finding aids. So the number we just keep trying to catch up to, we keep adding more. And if we don't have repositories fix their templates, then the new ones they're creating are still not valid. So we have to make sure our repositories are updating any templates or programming language on their exporting so that the new finding aids they're writing we'll validate on the site. We're continuing to grow. In April, we had 60 members. And then when we got the May reports, we're up to 71 new members. So we're making sure we're updating those new members on the process. Another issue was just the variety of encoding software. We've got people using all different kinds, but most of us don't have access or knowledge of the other programs, so it's difficult for us to advise them on how to deal with an issue with an error message or an element if we don't have that program. So for me personally, I've never used ArchiveSpace, and someone has emailed me a question about how do I fix this? I have to refer to somebody else I can find who has that program and can test it out for me. And issues with contacts, the pandemic has made it difficult to contact new people. We've had staff layovers. There's just new archivists in positions for institutions, and trying to reach out to them has sometimes been difficult. So we're kind of working with a check-in system. And this is also where the buddies have been coming into play and following up with their assigned repositories to make sure that we're keeping tabs on everyone. We had some changes to the error reports. When we had our February reports come out versus our April ones, sometimes we were seeing brand new. It's just because the way it worked, if you fix the top level errors, then it would allow for the ones underneath it to kind of come through. So we had to go back and kind of update our guides and things for everyone to explain why they were suddenly seeing new errors on their reports. And of course, COVID, makes everything difficult. And then this February, we had actually planned the launch. We had all the error reports ready to go. We had a launch date. We had the emails draft. Our state of Texas shuts down in a blizzard. So what can you do at that point except for kind of laugh, and pushed everything back. We had to give it a few weeks so that everyone could do some damage control back in their offices. And then we kind of launched Tarot a few weeks later in March. So it's a lot of print on here, but basically this is the Tarot 2 deployment schedule that UT is following. And so just last week, we launched the admin side of the new website. So we're currently UX testing that. And now on this side, on the new site, we are able to add users, delete users, add repositories, and upload finding aids, which will now be immediately available on the new site. So there's no delay in that. Later this July, we'll launch the front-facing side and start UX testing that. And then come this fall, we will freeze the legacy site and upload and migrate all of the finding aids over to the new Tarot 2.0 site. So lessons learned that I hope you can take away from this remediation project is just to document everything. We were tracking our errors. We saved all the error reports so that we could compare the ones from February to May to see if there was something that was changing. We, had minutes for every meeting or discussions that we had. We have trainings and YouTube and recordings and transcripts of those. I'd also recommend that any time of project you're doing like this that stretches more than a year is to have some sort of onboarding documentation. So we had elections last fall and brought on new steering members, including myself. So I started in January, and then a month later, we were supposed to launch the new Terra remediation project. So it's a lot to do. And I kind of got a crash course on encoding finding aids and site validations. I was trying to figure out the qual site. So having documentation, if you've got turnover transitions on your team, so that they can kind of keep the ball to pick it up themselves. Divide and conquer, we use the buddy system again, so we don't overwhelm any one particular member or committee. We had lots of lines of communication, but tried to streamline that so you weren't getting 10,000 reply all. A lot of wonderful feedback. They really appreciate the buddy system and having somebody that they can talk to. And like I said, when we were having trouble reaching some repositories, having the buddies contact those individuals was a way to kind of spread the workload among all of us. And then just patience, persistence, and a good sense of humor. I think after 2020 and a massive snowmageddon type blizzard, I mean, who knows what else might be coming? Sharknadoes are next this summer, who knows? But just do what you can, keep going, keep moving forward, and you'll find solutions. So here's the current status based on our April and May reports. As of May, we have 71 member institutions, and of those 44 have started or finished the remediation of their files. 2% are working on it. We have 4,398 already remediated, ready to migrate to the new site. So we're at 29% complete as of May. But I look forward to getting our June report because we have a number of institutions who had to reset logins for the FTP site, and we have all the work from the remediator who's finished a lot of repositories. So those will all be prepared and ready for June. So I look forward to seeing that number go up even more. But it's been a big project, and we're to launch the new website and see how this all turns out in the end. So with that, I will stop share. And I think we have time for some questions.
Thank you so much, Samantha. I have one question from Jeffrey Potter, and he asked, they asked, do you need to prune unique fields from the central repository, identify core fields, or require the contributors to reformat work before it was handed off to your central archive?
Sorry, the first part cut out. What was the question again?
Do you
Well,
need...
I can explain a little bit
Oh,
better. I was
okay.
talking while trying to listen to everybody, and it's like, oh no. So yes, when you were remediating the data from different groups, did you find that any of them had extraneous data or unique data that you just had to cut out? Or did you realize that because it's an archive, you can't cut out any part of their descriptions, and so you had these outliers that you had to keep? And were any of these outliers a problem? Did you find that you had, did you require any of these contributors to reformat their own work and that kind of thing?
Yes, no, the whole point of the guide to remediation and the templates and things is that we want to have the repositories do this themselves, and so that they will update the templates, which is just kind of the layout of the elements in the finding aids, so that any new finding aids they create will validate on the side. So they should be doing it on their own, and a lot of them are. There are a number of elements that sometimes repositories didn't use, and so it'll return an error on the report. And then there's some things called warnings, which it's where we have the differentiation between this is a required versus a preferred element. And so as long as you fix the errors, the required elements, the files will still validate. So there's a bunch of optional things that repositories can opt not to put in their finding aids, and we won't require it. So I think it's like related materials, and if there was like a noted donor type thing. And so those return on all of ours because we just don't use that field and we don't require it. But the ones that we are requiring, they do have to put something in that field. And so we've run into issues where depending on the way they wrote the extent, they weren't using the correct format or element. And so it's one of those, yes, we are requiring you to put this in there. And for a number of us who are hand coding, it's literally opening up every single file and going through and manually fixing these errors. That's why for those who didn't have the time or the resources to get to it, we have the remediator kind of helping on their behalf, and she's literally just downloading their files, fixing the errors, sending it back to them so they can re-upload those files. But by and large, everyone seems to be trucking along with the project. It was just a lot of, I was staring at lines of code for days and days and days till your eyes go cross, but you get a kind of rhythm, because generally when it's an error, it's the same error on every single finding aid. So once you figured it out, it's easy kind of to fix. And then we had some volunteers who created like a program or a project in Oxygen, which you can tell it to fix it across all of your finding aids. So we had someone on our steering committee who put that together, and then we shared that resource with repositories. So we're trying to give them all the different options and shortcuts and tools so that they can fix it themselves. And then that's what the guide to remediation and the best practice guide will tell them. These elements are required for this to appear on the new website. So we are kind of giving them the guidance on what it needs and why we need it because of the new search features that the new website will have.
So you didn't tell them you had to kill this field entirely. Okay, cool.
Okay, thank you. There is one more question in Q&A, but I'm going to circle back to it after Devin's presentation, because I want to keep us on track. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Devin Murphy from the University of Texas Libraries. And I'm going to put a handout that they've prepared in chat for us.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Great. Excellent. So hello, everybody, and thank you for sharing your time with me today. I'm Devin Murphy, the Tarot Metadata Analyst at UT Austin, and I'll be presenting Searching for Tarot, Building Responsive and Ethical Civic Terms for Texas Archival Resources Online. I'll be taking a look at metadata workflows and ways to reimagine them in the face of non-white, non-Western information protocols. And before we get stuck in, I'd like to first state from my personal and informal relationship to where I'm at, that I'm coming to you from Shawnee, Wea, Miami, Yuchi, and Cherokee land, whose relationships to land and waters of the Ohio River extend from time immemorial and into the present and the future. So we all have our part to play in unsettling ourselves, and I endeavor to do that with subject terms in my work. So to guide us through the content, I've created this outline that tries to flow up my work, beginning with another introduction to what tarot is, and to my metadata work within tarot, including a bit of explanation about the data cleanup or validation work that I completed for the subject terms, before moving on to problematizing those same metadata workflows. I'll then talk a bit about some critical cataloging best practices and how I've applied them in my work with tarot, and then finishing with the limitations of such efforts. It's still worthwhile, but just important to keep a critical eye on those things. So this is basically the handout. There's a lot of abbreviations. It's a bit of an alphabet soup, so that's just meant to guide you through what it is I'm saying. So, to begin with, what is tarot? Again, tarot is an archival consortium consisting of over 60 members, aggregating their finding aids together in order to create an easy spot for researchers and other folks to find historical content from across Texas. On this slide is a screenshot of the legacy site and a sampling of tarot members with UT Austin related, some of them UT Austin related institutions on the left, and just a small sampling of other repositories from across Texas on the right. So as you can see, we've got a very wide swath of types of institutions involved in tarot. And as a tarot metadata analyst, it is my charge to analyze and create new control access terms for tarot's collections in order to improve search functions in the new Tarot 2.0 website. And this screenshot is just a view of my original Open or Find project of the legacy tarot control access data, which ranges from stuff from 20 years ago to whatever was entered as of August 2020. And in total, that's about 159,268 terms. A lot of stuff. So these new search functions include advanced search, which takes terms in the following EAD elements: subject topic, person name, corp name, and geoname, and displays them in the search results, which you can then filter further if you so desire, as well as browse search, which includes just subject topic and geoname. These results are canned or pre-generated from specific browse terms that I make, and it's a high-level browse search looking at broad categories. So you're not going to get everything that tarot has in its result. So how did I prepare the tarot data for these search functions? I conducted data validation and reconciliation to clean up this legacy content. This legacy tarot data, so again, ranging from 20 years old to last year, contained a variety of challenges, ranging from missing source attributions, so trying to figure out where did this term come from? Is it accurate? Is the syntax right? To misspellings, to incorrect syntax, to things being in the wrong category. So people being classed as places, or organizations being classed as singular people. To create new control access terms for browse and advanced search, I had to first figure out what past practice was amongst all these institutions and what subjects were even in tarot. What is here? To do so, I used Open or Find to enact basic spelling and syntax changes, as well as employing data validation workflows to trace where terms came from, so that they could then be checked for the right value and format. And generally, there are two major paths to do this. You can manually check your data against sources like thesauri or authority files to make sure that information is actually part of that source and it meets the syntax and all that good stuff. Or you can use reconciliation services to automate the whole process for you, or partially automate it, matching up records, terms, and people's names for you, letting you see what is and is not in a source. And those services are really great, but they don't exist for every thesauri that's out there. The only active ones I've been able to use in my own work are for the Getty, Library of Congress, and VOF. So here's some screenshots of ones that don't have that. This is the source of graphic materials and rare books and manuscripts, controlled vocabularies. So for these, I had to manually check the existence of terms by just literally control finding or going down a list. But they're rather small, so it's okay. If I had a reconciliation service like I did for the Getty, Library of Congress, or VOF, I was able to make this work by employing an API, or Application Programming Interface, which sends requests to get information from those sites and then display it into my Open or Find project. sending post queries, which asks for, do these things match? Can I have a list of possible matches? Can I have rankings to show me what is the best possible match? Then information is transformed from a JSON object into the visual results that I can see in the program. And then you can add further requests if you want to get the URIs for all these terms, or if you wanted to get the full record information, or if you want to get multiple records information. I often didn't have to go that far. I just retrieved the URIs to be able to have a stable link between terms in case they change. And so here's a screenshot of like a general Getty art and architecture thesaurus term to kind of illustrate what that means. So this is just like its general page of the term transcripts on the website. And here, this ID is its uniform resource identifier. And then the reconciliation service that they have will match up this content with this term transcripts in the data. And I can get, as a result, a match with this hyperlink, which will open up in this page, and also the ID. So useful. So after reconciliation, your results are nice, cleaned up terms that match the syntax and spelling of their counterparts. So you can see legacy AAT data on the left where there's blanks and some of the syntax is on right, you've got uppercase. And then on here, you have no blanks and everything fits how the Getty vocabularies formats your terms. Now, while these workflows work well with general concepts, like in my last slide of generic, just genre form terms, they also operate within some assumptions about information use that do vary across contexts, communities, and cultures. And much like folks across the cultural heritage world have been looking into these kinds of assumptions and library practices, it makes sense to examine our more technical workflows too. So I'll be using some Indigenous examples because my background is in Indigenous studies. That's what I've worked on before, but this problem is everywhere and I had to do similar work for other kinds of terms in tarot as well. And I'll show a bit about that later. So, for example, consider some of the common sources used to retrieve metadata for cultural heritage items. Like the Library of Congress's headings and in authorities. Its records for some terms, like a lot of Indigenous subjects, unfortunately, are often lacking, incorrect, or pejorative. So just as an example of terms relating to Nuchalmuth subjects. Nutka is a pejorative term. It's not used by the community. They state very clearly on their tribal website, this term is not okay. And yet there are existing headings with IDs that can and will be retrieved by open or friend. This is something I had to look out for reconciling terms in tarot and being sure to not match those. And if they did auto match, I had to undo it, put in the appropriate name, and just note that this is not an exact library purpose term. So this circle just shows, this little button shows it's an author's heading, it has an ID, it will be retrieved. Another common source is the Getty vocabularies. Here we have a similar record for Nuchalmuth material culture, with the inset showing sources used to find literary warrant or proof of use for the pejorative term. Many Indigenous terms for the Getty were first made in the 1980s, 1990s, when Getty was kind of getting its start, using older scholarship not vetted by Indigenous partners and often containing stereotypical names and information. Library of Congress obviously shares this problem, with many Indigenous terms entering from scholarship in the late 20th century, had its own colonial biases, and it made with extractive relationships with tribes. There's a much deeper history about that, but I don't have time to share that here, but it's very fascinating to me. So there are also inequities inherent in the ideal workflow of data validation of getting singular terms and concepts from public sources to describe objects. In many other information protocols, like some Indigenous knowledge ones, a singular object or concept may really be multiple and need more complex ways to show its relationships, as well as the fact that one single source or colonial source may not be the best representation of an item. So these are just some questions to be raised about the workflows we use, and these haunted me throughout all of my work. So in turn, our workflows and the data we work with have real world effects on the people, communities, and cultures they describe. Reconciling data uncritically can allow us to perpetuate and share inaccurate and inconsistent information, in turn making it harder for those communities to find information, which, and you get Indigenous here, but it goes without saying for other communities too, and also creating perpetuating cultural and religious harm. So examples of that would be sharing terms about Indigenous religious practices that can't be shared outside of that community, or belittling beliefs by calling them folklore or mythology. So Marissa Duarte and Miranda Bellardi-Lewis expand on this further in their article, noting that, quote, challenges include identifying authoritative names of tribes and peoples, such as Navajo or Diné, historical periodization within Anglo-American cataloging and classification schemes, and identifying accurate terms to reflect the unexpected diversity of Indigenous topics. We assert that these are not unrelated and inconvenient phenomena endemic to Indigenous knowledge, but rather the evidence of systemic global marginalization, end quote. So how can we approach these really big problems? What are some best practices? It is all about relationships. So data transformation is not a passive process, but it's relational. In terms of what we are describing, objects, images, and ideas that came from deeply relational processes. So examples include the Macabre Cultural Research Center, where their curator, Janine Boachuk, talks about how their storage and their collections are organized by family in place and not by material or accession number, to show that these items have relationships that exist beyond their existence as being a museum object. The same for their digital records too. So if we want to do right by the communities we have and use in our collections, we have to honor those existing relations by not smothering them with work processes that don't take that content into account. Our best practices must be informed by these relationships. So, quote, it is insufficient to care only for the object, which is the material expression of a people's way of life. And so the knowledge itself, including the means it's making, must be treated with respect, including the establishment of fair and just reciprocal relationships between the holding institutions and the indigenous peoples who created the original expressions, end quote. So what Cindy Littletree, Barty Lewis, and Marty are saying is that all related data, from names to places and descriptions, need as much respect as cultural objects. And this includes digital records we may be, I have been, working with OpenRefine. So how do we honor those relationships? So just as the author suggests, we have to enter in those relationships ourselves. We can't erase the colonial processes either brought collections and terms to us. To place ourselves outside of that is to deny that history. So creating relationships honors those knowledges and also helps us reconcile the problems within our collections. And some good practices include contacting the communities described in those terms, quote, not as sources to be mined, but as epistemic partners, end quote, and including them in all parts of the process, having a clear outline of the work before, contacting people, and then of course being flexible to changes proposed. So building from that theme, I have a revised workflow comparing to the one I shared initially, where consultation with Western established authorities is but just one part of the process, and one that needs to be checked or offered to communities to be edited. The other is to enter relationships with communities and experts and using resources made by them, not extractive, like literally extracting terms OpenRefine, but employing both the information and the protocols for that information. And then most importantly, sharing that content back, unlike the more singular exchange between name authorities below. So, and then these purple arrows are like an idealized hope that will happen in these name authorities. It does a little bit at the Getty. They have a partnership with some Knock-On scholars, but it'd be nice to have more. And then just as like a good resource for that, the guidelines for collaboration from the School of Advanced Research basically has a flexible guide that outlines questions and expectations for institutions and for community partners. I suggest it very highly. I have used it a lot. It has helped me draft all kinds of emails I've sent, so it's great. What does that look like though with Intero? So I decided to contact professionals and community partners when finding problematic terms, employing their changes and any like extra protocols for those changes, and then sharing my results back when people requested. So some examples include working with Benson staff at UT Austin, such as Carl Alvarez and Rachel Winston, revising Black and Latin American Chicana terms. Also working with Christine Bone and other both Indigenous and non-Indigenous librarians in Canada on Indigenous terms. Working with Bree Watson, a collaborator on Homosaurus with LGBTQ terms. With Terra stakeholders as well on their general thoughts on how to structure control access, with some really great feedback on how to deal with local terms. And then lastly, there's a possible future collaboration with University of British Columbia with some First Nations terms that wasn't super sure how to deal with. So I'm talking with them right now on what to do. So a huge thank you to all of them, because literally these changes wouldn't have happened without them. So thanks. I repeated this process with community resources too, besides contacting people directly, such as tribal websites or tribe-made resources that are publicly available to update terms, guides like the Anti-Racist Description Guide and Disability Language Style Guide, looking to what other institutions do, like University of Chicago's Visual Resource Center, and they have like they document their whole process and how to do making better control access terms. So I've talked to them a bit. And then also tribal research statements to ensure resources I looked at could be used in the manner that I wanted to use them, and asking, can I do that? So here are some literal examples of terms in Tarot that have changed in this way. So using the Manitoba Archival Information Network Indigenous Subject Terms Heading Guide, which is made by a consortium of Indigenous and non-Indigenous librarians, I revised all of the Indigenous and Native American terms, which were about 600 in Teradata. That included updating tribe names to those actually currently used, as well as revising civic terms with harmful biases like Indian captivities, which upon consultation with some folks implies only Indigenous people took captives and plays into harmful false histories of such practices. So that was eye-opening to me. And so just to look into the workflow for that particular term, this is what I did like every time. I researched its context. So what is the original finding it's in? How is it being used? That's really helpful to figure out. Maybe this is something that needs to be edited. Maybe it's fine. And also the original source of the term. It's helpful too because it will have citations for where that item is being found. Look into those sources. Then reach out to experts and community members to see what they think about the term, as well as community-made documents, such as the civic heading list or tribal websites or what have you. And then based on that consultation, make the change and then share that I've made this change. So other example changes include updating terms like Afro-American, amending slavery terms to fit current best practices in those historical fields, keeping Black capitalized, and using, basically using, I've used anti-racist description guidelines, the same one talk about slavery guidelines, help from Rachel Winston, other partners. Great. And then just as another last example, amending terms for disabled disability information. And these were derived from Arizona State University's Disability Language Guide, as well as a disability terms list from ADAPT, which is a disability organization. So there are many other examples of things that were revised. These are just a few that I like picked out to share. However, though, every workflow and process has limitations and may need to change for the context. So for example, changing terms does not necessarily change harmful information practices. You can make those changes and yet still be extractive in your relationships with other communities. Not all information can be shared publicly or in our systems. Not all knowledge items can ever be ethically represented in our systems, and sometimes collaboration just isn't possible. There are many times that I had emails sent back saying, sorry, I just don't have the bandwidth for this right now, or I don't want to work with you, and that's okay. It just happens like that. But it's still worthwhile in order to create more accountable and honestly more correct information systems. Being flexible to other information protocols may slowly shift over time and get us away from extractive systems. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Devin. I have one question, and Nicole is asking it, and if they would like to ask it themselves, feel free, turn on your video. But when using OpenRefine, did you run into issues with subject strings? And how did you approach validating local terms?
So yes, I did. Part of that problem I had found was any term that ended with a period just wouldn't match. And I believe it was because OpenRefine was trying to read both the dashes and periods as separators. So it was expecting more content. So I basically had to remove all of them to get them to match at all for Library of Congress. So that helped there. Otherwise, even if some of the dashes were inconsistent, like there were big spaces or they were using M dashes, it could still figure it out. The period just really threw it off for some reason. For local terms, I generally went through the policy of I am leaving them alone. I'm going to respect the practice of what other institutions have done for their content and just not change them in that way, unless if they were relating to these like subject areas. That mostly didn't happen though. Like the vast majority of these were Library of Congress terms or Getty terms or FAST. And like there were a few local headings that applied to disabled subjects, but.
Excellent, thank you. And if anyone would like to jump on and ask either Samantha's group or Devin a question, please feel free. We do have about 5 minutes of extra time.
Well, while we're waiting for another question, kind of to piggyback off Devin's last point about the local terms, that is part of what the new authorized terms subcommittee of TARO is going to look at. Basically, we wanted to make it a way to curate a local headings list or a subject list for TARO that was so that member repositories can suggest a new local term to be included in the browse function of the Tarot website. And that way we'd have a committee that way, again, Tarot is being informed by the repositories and we're using our local terms as generated by our participants. So that's what the hope is with this committee, is to have a number of voices on it who have cataloging experience, who know these authorized formats and things and thesauruses, so that they can use that knowledge to curate a more local terms list for us.
I have a general question for both of you. I'm just kind of curious, like what challenge you may have found a solution for, or what kind of little piece of a project that you worked on that you're most proud of.
Well, I guess I can go. I'll start. I was part of Tarot as a member at large when we were doing the NEH planning grant. And so that was the last time I was kind of on the back end of Tarot. I had, some coding experience based on the institutions that I worked for, but then when I came on as vice chair and then suddenly got thrown into this remediation ad hoc committee, it was kind of like beyond overwhelming. I don't have cataloging experience. And so trying to figure out these elements myself and then going through code till my eyes were crossed. I'm excited now that I have a much better grasp of it. And that's also why we're hoping that repositories fixing these errors and things themselves is empowering them with more knowledge of the encoding standards and our descriptive standards, giving them some more technical skills. So that's something I'm just proud that I've managed to figure out after, working on this with this group. Many great people where I could literally, email someone like, I don't understand what this is saying, or where do I find, how to fix this element or format something. So it's literally getting thrown into the deep end and it's like swim and you just have to figure it out. So I'm just glad that I was able to pick that up.
Yeah, I share a similar sentiment to you, Samantha, for sure. Because I guess one part of it was learning all about natural language processing for this job, something I had never done before, but quickly became apparent I had to do it to figure out how to wade through about 76,000 subject terms to find browse terms within them. So I feel proud of myself for learning an entirely new field in like 3 months to figure out the best way to represent tarot in such a small amount of terms. And I think also this work too, I'm glad to have built relationships with different experts and scholars and community members to like have terms that are both like accurate, reflective of how things are being described today. And I think, and at the same time, like people who I've consulted with like now want that list and are excited for Tarot too. So it's like its reach has like grown bigger.
Excellent. Thank you for answering my question. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd like to encourage everyone to join us for upcoming TCDL sessions, like the Leadership Academy Roundtable, which is coming up next. Please take a look at our poster presenters. I'm going to drop a list in chat of posters that might interest you in relation to this presentation, and also a link to participate in our poster scavenger hunt. And thank you all for being here today. And thank you to our presenters.